And then we move on to Jackie on food and sustainable environment. Please.
Thank you very much. I'm going to show you a very short film trailer from a film that we've made at the agency to support the work of the UNEP International Resource Panel. And the panel started out with, I think, a very simple view that it was about resource productivity, resource efficiency. But as we went on, we've had to really tackle the fact that it's about water, it's about land, it's about food, and so on. So going from metals and rare earths all the way through, we see that there are some fundamental issues. So I'm going to show the film. It's very, very short. It's called Planet Rethink. And then after that, I'm going to come back and perhaps suggest a rather more evolutionary way that we might undertake science and science policy in this particular area. Thank you.
Today's so-called development model is completely unsustainable. The way we are going at the moment is to use more and more materials and energy and resources and water and everything else.
We are destroying the world, and the world is sick.
There is no price on destroying nature.
The costs of what we do keep going up. At some point, you have to say, look, we've got to design our future in a way that this damage is minimized.
If we don't think sustainably, then we'll face huge costs.
We grow and grow and grow, and we increase the amount of resources and energy that we are dependent on.
The more fossil fuels we burn, the more greenhouse gases we emit.
Everybody talks about growth, but how can you have continued growth on a finite planet?
In an ideal society, there should be no waste.
So we will need to become much smarter and always look at resources from the perspective of how efficiently we can use, reuse, and recycle them. We need to rethink the way we live and act on this planet. Coming to a cinema near you. You can download it on Facebook as well and off the agency's website. The point about doing this film was really to highlight the fact that it is a complex interaction of all our use of resources. And we can talk about water, we can talk about land, we can talk about crops. But actually, it's about a mindset. It's about the way that we live on this planet and the way that we will utilize what we have at our disposal. And being in the kind of world where I am, I have to say that the clearest problem that we're going to have in the future is that those very people who we're hoping to collect all the data, the monitoring, the science, are really under pressure. There's fewer resources, ministries are cutting staff, and so on. And so I recall for you a conversation that I had with a senior commission official when we were talking about what we were going to do and how we were going to mobilize in the face of the recession and the cuts. And I happened to mention the word citizens, and upon which the senior commission official said, "Oh my God, 50 million more inspectors." But it's real, and this was really a turning point, because in the debates and in the discussions, we then really, I think, tapped into what I would consider to be the next stage in how we might do science and how we might do research and work in a genuine bridging between science and policy, and that is to bring citizens and citizen science into the very fabric of what we're doing. I'll give you two stories. One is in India. India had, to some extent, a rather naive picture about its water up until 2 years ago. In fact, if you read the reports, and I know there are some colleagues here from India, but nevertheless, I think it's important that we sort of say how the situation was, and that was that pretty much water was potable, available for agriculture, and you could just nip down to your local stream and drink it. Well, I think any one of us would have thought twice about doing that. Well, the answer really came when the minister himself began to ask, well, where did the data come from? And of course it came from engineers who actually knew what the answer was. So when they took the sample, they sent the answer that they knew the answer should be. So thinking about this, they turned the model completely upside down and instead said, well, let's look at the people who live there. Let's equip people in villages and in the communities with the wherewithal to measure not only quantity but water quality. And let's get them, in fact, to be our monitoring program. So that's exactly what happened. People were empowered, they were given mobile telephones connected to the ministry, actually to the minister, and every day or every week they would go and take a sample. The whole community would go, they would look at what the number was, and actually that was the number that was transmitted. And the minister himself said at our meeting of the resource panel, within a very short period of time, 95% of India's waters became non-potable. And I think this is really our challenge. We need more people involved in the science of monitoring. We need more people actually helping us to collect quality assured information, and then in the way we need to act upon it. At the other extreme, we have some very interesting proponents of science. In fact, we happen to have 60,000 of them in our agency. They live on the roof, they're very cheap, and they go out every day and they collect a lot of information. They come back and by chance they happen to make some honey, but they also provide a huge independent view of the quality of where we actually grow our food. And it turns out that honeybees, as maybe some of you know, they're quite controversial at the moment, when exposed to nicotinoids, actually don't do very well. But when they live in cities where they don't experience nicotinoids, but they do experience a lot of heavy metals and pollutants and contaminants, have an inbuilt mechanism whereby those bees that go out and gather the various nectars and come back sit in a corner in the hive, and in a way they divest the heavy metals and the contaminants by absorbing it into their bodies through special organs and then cleaning the honey to then be stored into the hive itself. So a kind of self-cleaning process. They tell us in a way a lot about our environment, about not only its health, about its services, but they really are enormously useful if we were thinking about using that knowledge to tell us not just simply about the air quality, but about air emissions and the absorption into the ecosystem. So what I put to you is that we need, I think, genuinely to believe that there is an intermediary that will enable our science in a way to be catapulted into the daily lives of politicians. Because at the end of the day, many policymakers are more concerned about their constituents. They're much more concerned about how they will be re-elected. We talked about that this morning. Having people participate in science, I think, genuinely is something that we need to consider very, very seriously. Now, in the agency and with our colleagues in the federal government, in the US, in Canada, in the Arctic, all throughout the world, we're beginning, in fact, to bring in people, communities of practice, not only people with traditional knowledge, but also lay and local knowledge, to really harness different aspects. So now going to food to finish up. You know, it's really boring listening to someone like me talking about biodiversity, I can tell you. I mean, I can be appealing, I guess. But you know who really, really talks about biodiversity and people listen? Chefs. People who cook food can talk about biodiversity in a very interesting way. So we have a kind of program which says, actually, if you combine the top-class chefs in the world and combine them with foragers who go out and actually harvest, in many ways it's a very Scandinavian way of thinking, but I can tell you in Peru and other places this is also happening. The real biodiversity that's out there in communities, in traditional lands, and turn that into some of the most high-class food that you can actually consume in top-class restaurants, then suddenly sweet potatoes and many other things like the samphire, which I suddenly saw on the marshes, Halicarnassus, they become the dish of desire. And there is a growing industry in Europe, and I think in many other countries, in Africa and elsewhere, where people are turning now to the traditional foods, much of the biodiversity that's been overlooked, and bringing it back into the mainstream economy. So I think it's about harnessing many other people to help us get these messages over, but also to help them actually underpin our modelling work and the kind of policy work that we're doing with many, many millions of more observations, because we're going to need it. Climate change will not be a homogeneous process. And when we think about food production, when we think about our use of water, it will be so tailored to local conditions that we will need to know what's happening on the ground, not from just a few research projects, not from just a few satellites with some in situ sensor webs, but we're going to need to have millions and millions of people, maybe using smartphones, maybe using Eye on Earth, which is our global public service, maybe using UNEP Live, all these different things. But we need people all over the world telling us what's happening in their local environment, so that policymakers can get a sense of what's really happening in real time. And it's true for food, it's true for water, it's true for land. I think it's true for everything that we want to touch as we go forward into sustainable living. So, power to the people, power to science, and I think that's my message. And just while I've got the microphone, I just want to say a personal message. There are many of you in the audience who have helped me personally, but also the agency over the last 9 months. And I don't know all of you. All I know is it's the most amazing networked group of people. And you saved us last night, and we got the vote in the plenary. So thank you very much, all of those who did help. Thank you.